Thank you. I'm honored. I am truly honored to be here, and this is one of our congregation's favorite worship services across the year. So thank you for inviting us and maintaining this friendship, and for letting me speak tonight. We've been doing this, I think, you and I, about 5 years, right? So I think it's probably time for your congregation to just know what it's like to have a pastor who has grandchildren, which is to say, you're going to hear about my grandchildren tonight, you know? Because I just got back from a trip to Denver last night, actually. My grandchildren, I have a granddaughter who is almost 4 and a grandson who's about 15 months old. And I went thinking that, I would write this sermon while I was there. Oh, yeah. The most I could do was intermittently think about the words of Psalm 22, and I never really got past the very first line. My God, why have you abandoned me, And it felt strange because I really am happiest when I'm with my grandchildren. And it felt strange to think about that line while I was surrounded by the joy of my grandchildren as they were, being so open and playful and creative, and to just simply marvel at the learning that they were encountering between my visits. My grandson has already mastered the ability to play with his sister's toys, and my granddaughter has also learned how to grab them back and scream about the injustice of the entire situation, right? Yeah, my granddaughter's cry is not quite, my God, why have thou abandoned me? But, I'm grateful about that, The plea of the psalmist is born out of a gut-wrenching anguish. It's brought on by an unashamed, shameful act, or acts even. Maybe it's a combination of all of the horrible things that one could do to their fellow human beings, And we know the situations that would call out a cry like that from us. October 7th. Hamas-led military groups instigated an attack on Israel, and the war continues to this day. It has sparked anger and violence and threats and hatred across the world and even in our community. And I know you know that. And I'm sorry about that. And the damage is everywhere, affecting mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, children, grandparents, friends, neighbors, all of whom I imagine have cried out similar words, if not these exact words, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why the psalmist has experienced this anguish, we don't exactly know. Scholars suggest that the psalmist was certainly a royal figure, maybe King David or King Hezekiah or Queen Esther. According to the tractate Megillah of the Babylonian Talmud, Queen Esther was on the way to the throne to plead with the king to spare her people. He had planned to do horrible things. And on her way to the throne room, she passed through a hall of idols, and she felt the divine presence leave her. And that was when she said, my God, why have you abandoned me? King Hezekiah was the 13th king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and he witnessed an attack on Jerusalem by Assyria. And the Assyrian king Sennacherib, did I say that close? Close enough. The king. Why do I try and pronounce these words? The king, he actually wrote in his annals how he had trapped King Hezekiah like a caged bird. Yeah, but that's not the only reason King Hezekiah would have felt some anguish. The fall to Babylon was yet to come, and that, of course, would result in the exile from Jerusalem that lasted generations. My God, why have you abandoned me? And King David, he could have said those words too. David had God's favor ever since he was a young shepherd playing the harp, ever since he had catapulted the rock from his slingshot to kill Goliath, ever since he became Saul's favorite, whose support made David king. And as king, he seemed to have God's favor in uniting the tribes of Israel and bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He had God's favor until he didn't. My God, why have you abandoned me? All three of these people could have written that psalm, and many others too, from the beginning of time to today. We only heard a portion of Psalm 22. The psalmist goes on to affirm the faith of the fathers, as we heard, but then he seems to suggest that his anguish is nothing like his ancestors, and then he lists all of his troubles. And then something shifts. Right between being in the mouth of the lion and inches away from the wild oxen's horns, the psalmist suddenly declares, God has answered my cries. I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened in that space. What happened between that deep, anguished roar and the answer for moving forward? What happened? As you can imagine, the exchange between my grandchildren, between the one who took the toy and the one who roared about it, well, that did not go well. It ended with both of them crying, both of them screaming for their mother trying to console both of them. To be 4 and 15 months again. As my grandchildren grow, though, they'll learn, which might just mean that my grandson will learn how to take his sister's toys away when she's not looking, and maybe that might mean my granddaughter will learn how to put her toys out of reach of her brother's hands. Their mother actually hopes that they'll learn ways to engage with one another that are more compassionate. She's already trying to teach them to understand each other, the differences between being a big kid and a little toddler. She's asking her big girl daughter to take turns and to share with her baby brother, telling her that one day her brother will learn how to ask if he could play with his sister's toys. I hope, though, that I might be able to help them learn about God. Because there will be a time when my grandchildren might cry with anguish this same plea, and that they might seek to be delivered from it. And when that time comes, I hope that they will come to know what occurs in that space between that deep, anguished roar and the answer that allows them to move forward. My guess is that God is not taking a cat nap in that space between. I don't think he's busy doing something else. I don't think she's ignoring us, trying not to make up his mind. I just don't think that in that space between, God is changing all that much. God is always steadfast, always loving. My guess is that in that space between, God might be changing us. Letting us express ourselves in honesty, getting it all out and in the open. And maybe then inviting us to just be still and know God. And in the stillness, maybe we might come to understand the way God does things. Because we know God does things differently than we do. Right? God is the creator of worlds unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies. Creator of the diversity of all the species and the giftedness of humankind. God is the one who gave us the idea that we can beat our swords into plowshares and that our spears will become pruning hooks. God is the one who gave us the dream of a world where we all have a place at the table, where we can all sit in the shade of our own vines. And we all fall short of God's ways so many times, don't we? You know, our founding fathers came to America to create a place where all people would be equal, where everyone's unalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness would be honored. And we've settled so many times. We think close enough is good enough. Turns out that the people who were living here were doing a pretty good job of all of that long before we, immigrants, arrived. We have a hard time admitting that, and we still have a hard time figuring out how to live that dream. Yeah, God's ways don't settle for close enough. Right? We've got some learning to do. God always pairs justice with righteousness. We tend to pair justice with vengeance. God creates beloved community. We tend to create winners and losers. God gives us freedom, and we tend to use that to do whatever is good for us. And God holds all possibilities, and we tend to do the same things over and over again. I think sometimes we ignore that space between the anguished cries and the listening God. I think we rush too quickly into answers that are more like our ways than like God's. You know, when the kids both started crying over that toy, my daughter, she didn't try to teach them, to talk sense into them, you know, not at first anyway. She couldn't be heard. They were very loud, by the way. They were having, as what my daughter calls, big emotions. You know, my daughter just held them, both of them. At nearly 4 and 15 months, she could do that still. And her embrace was enough to cease their sobs, to steady their breathing, and to find something new to do. I think if we rush too quickly through that space, we miss an opportunity. And I do believe that in that space, God holds his child, that she holds all her children all around the world, holding us while we cry until that anguish starts to dissipate, until our sobs cease and our breathing steadies, until we notice that God is listening and God has answered. It just might not be recognizable because God's ways are so different. The psalm ends with the psalmist saying, "Future descendants will serve God. They will proclaim God's righteousness to those yet unborn, telling them what God has done." That's what I want my grandchildren to learn. and we can learn alongside them. And maybe one day it will not feel strange to cry out with anguish in one moment and find joy soon after, having been in that space between where we are held by the divine, where we are comforted and stilled enough to listen as the divine brings openness and joy, play and creativity in God's way forward. And maybe we all will learn to not take away someone else's toys or life. May it be so. Amen.